It was just after 10 when I locked up for the night. Another Friday, another quiet evening with nothing but the hum of my fridge and a plate of leftovers waiting for me. The street was still, porch lights soft and yellow against the damp pavement. That kind of stillness that makes you think too much if you let it. I'd seen her earlier that afternoon. Mrs. Carter, though nobody ever called her that. To everyone on the street, she was just Lena. Mid-40s, maybe older, with the kind of presence that made you straighten your posture without realizing why. I'd caught her out front pruning her roses while I was pulling in from work. She'd waved, polite as always, that faint smile on her lips, the kind that doesn't give too much away. And I'd done what I always do, smiled back, a little too quickly, and disappeared into my place like the socially competent adult I keep pretending to be. Inside, I'd hovered by my phone, thumb over the screen like there was anyone to text. There wasn't. Just a few unsent drafts sitting in my notes app, things I'd never actually say to anyone. I told myself I liked it that way. Quiet. Simple. Nobody expecting anything from me. But even then, I'd caught myself thinking about her. The way she brushed her hair back, wrist twisting just slightly. The way her laugh had sounded that one time in the grocery store when I joked about the line taking longer than my entire shift. Stupid things. Background noise. Except it never stayed background noise for long. By the time I'd microwaved dinner and scrolled through half a dozen meaningless videos, the night had settled heavy. I was leaning against the kitchen counter, staring at the half-empty coffee cup I'd forgotten to rinse, when the knock came. 3 knocks. Soft, but steady. I froze, listening. Nobody ever came by this late. My first thought was that something was wrong. My second thought was, God help me, her. When I opened the door, I wasn't prepared. Not for her. Not like that. Lena stood there, towel knotted loosely at her chest, damp hair clinging to her shoulders. Bare feet on the concrete. Skin glistening faintly in the porch light like she'd just stepped out of the shower and straight into the night air. She started, then stopped. Her hand twitched against the edge of the towel, like she'd almost thought better of it. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just looked at her, trying not to, and failing anyway. My water heater, she said finally, voice softer than usual. It just quit on me. I didn't know who else to. She stopped again. Looked down, then back up at me, eyes steady but not unreadable. The quiet stretched. The kind of quiet that feels alive, where you can hear the hum of the porch light and the distant bark of some dog down the block, but none of it registers because all you can hear is your own pulse in your ears. Of course, I managed. My voice cracked, just barely. I stepped back, opened the door wider, even though I wasn't sure what I was inviting in. Come in. She hesitated, just for a second, then crossed the threshold like she'd done it 100 times before. And just like that, the room felt smaller, warmer. The scent of her soap, something faintly floral, mixing with the sharp tang of reheated coffee and detergent. I closed the door, and somewhere in the back of my head, something shifted. Something I couldn't quite name yet, but I knew that whatever this was, it wasn't nothing. I told myself it was just a neighborly thing, just helping someone out. That's what I told myself as I offered her a towel, as I avoided looking too long at the drops of water clinging to her collarbone, as she thanked me in that soft voice that didn't quite match the look in her eyes. But later, after she'd gone, after the silence of my house wrapped around me again, my phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. Thanks for letting me in. I stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering over the keyboard. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel quite as alone. The next time I saw her, it was daylight, but that didn't make it any easier. I was sitting on my porch steps, coffee cooling in my hands, pretending to scroll through emails when her door opened. She stepped out like nothing had happened, hair pulled into a loose bun, sunglasses tucked into the neck of her t-shirt. She waved, casual, like that late-night knock had been just another Tuesday. Morning, she called. I managed something back, a half-formed hey. That sounded steadier than it felt. She crossed the lawn to the mailbox, moving slow, almost deliberate. And I hated that I noticed. Hated that my brain replayed every detail of that night in the quiet moments. The smell of her shampoo, The way her fingers lingered on the edge of the towel when she'd said thank you, like she wasn't sure if she should even be there. By the time she turned back, I was already looking away, pretending to study a crack in the concrete. Later that week, it rained. Not a soft drizzle, but a steady, relentless downpour that turned the street into a sheet of gray. I'd just finished bringing in the trash cans when I heard her voice. "You're going to catch something out there." I turned, and there she was, leaning against her doorway with 2 mugs in her hands. Steam curled up in the damp air. "Tea," she said, holding one out. "Before you drown." I hesitated, because that's what I do, but I still crossed the street. Her porch smelled like wet wood and lemon polish. She handed me the mug without meeting my eyes, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. "Thanks," I murmured. She sipped her own tea, watching the rain. "I used to love storms," she said finally. "When I was little, my dad would sit with me by the window. We'd count the seconds between the lightning and the thunder. He'd make up stories about where the lightning struck." I glanced at her, surprised. She rarely volunteered pieces of herself like that. "Do you still do that?" I asked. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "No, not in a long time." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was quiet, full, like the sound of rain had wrapped around us, holding everything else at bay. And that's when it hit me, the weight of it. The age gap. The fact that she had a whole life behind her, a marriage she didn't talk about, years I hadn't even lived through. And me? 24, with nothing to show but a handful of night shifts and a car that still smelled like fast food. I shouldn't have been there. Not like that. And yet, when her shoulder brushed mine as she shifted to set her mug down, I didn't move. When the rain eased, I handed the mug back, careful not to let my fingers brush hers. She tilted her head, studying me in a way that made my chest tighten. "You're quiet," she said. I swallowed. "Always been that way." Her lips curved into something small but knowing. "No," she said softly. "Not always. Just careful." I didn't know what to do with that, so I laughed, low and awkward, more an exhale than anything. She didn't laugh, just looked at me for a moment longer, then reached out, and with the lightest touch, brushed a drop of rain off my sleeve. It was nothing, a neighborly gesture, but it didn't feel like nothing. And when I walked back to my side of the street, tea still warm in my chest, I realized I hadn't even asked for my mug back. It was the Thursday after the storm when things shifted again. I'd just gotten home from a late shift, the kind that leaves you half awake but wired enough to stare at the ceiling until morning. My apartment smelled like takeout and detergent. Quiet. Always quiet. Then I saw her porch light flicker on. She was out front, sitting on the steps, hair loose, phone in her hand, but face tilted toward the dark street like she wasn't really looking at anything. I told myself to just wave, maybe nod, then keep walking. I didn't. Couldn't sleep? I asked when I was close enough. She startled, just a little, then smiled like she'd been expecting me anyway. Something like that. I sat, 2 steps down, because it felt safer that way. Close enough to talk, far enough that I could pretend it meant nothing. For a while, we didn't say much. The neighborhood was still, just the hum of street lights, the distant sound of a car on the highway. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "My ex used to work nights." I hated it. The house never felt steady. I turned, caught the faint shake of her hand as she scrolled her phone, not looking at me. "You miss him?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her laugh was soft, almost sharp. "No, just the idea of someone always coming home." And that, God, that lodged somewhere in my chest. Because I understood. Not her marriage, not the years she carried, but the wanting, the quiet ache of being alone in a place that felt too big at night. I almost said something, almost told her about the unsent texts, the nights that felt endless. But her phone buzzed then, lighting up her face in a sharp glow. She didn't answer, just flipped it face down, her shoulders going stiff for a second too long before she smoothed them again. "Everything okay?" I asked carefully. "Fine," she said too quickly. And just like that, the air changed. The next day, I saw her talking to someone in her driveway. A man, tall, maybe my age, maybe older, wearing the kind of easy smile that said he'd been there before. I told myself it was nothing. A friend. A relative. Someone fixing her car. But that didn't stop the twist in my stomach. Didn't stop the way my steps slowed as I passed. How my ears caught the way she laughed, lighter than she ever sounded with me. That night, I didn't turn my porch light on. 2 days later, she knocked. Early evening, sun still low, air thick with the kind of heat that makes everything feel slower. "You okay?" she asked when I opened the door, like it was her place to worry. I hesitated. "Yeah, just tired." She studied me, head tilted slightly, eyes tracing my face like she was trying to find the part one wasn't saying. "You don't have to be careful with me," she said finally, voice almost a whisper. Something in me cracked then, quiet but sharp. I stepped back, let her in. The apartment felt too small, the air too heavy. She hovered near the counter, fingers brushing the edge like she needed something to hold on to. I wanted to say something. Anything. Instead, I just looked at her. Really looked, at the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her hair caught the light, the way her chest rose and fell like she was holding her breath. And for a second, one sharp, aching second, we were close enough that it would have been easy. One step, one hand. But then she looked away, and the moment was gone. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of ordinary, forgettable day that doesn't warn you it's about to change something. I'd run into her outside the corner store. She was carrying a paper bag of groceries, hair pulled back, sunglasses perched on her head like she'd forgotten they were there. "Walking home?" she asked, nodding toward my empty hands. "Yeah," I said. "Needed coffee." She smiled, small but warm, and we fell into step together, side by side down the narrow sidewalk, our shadows stretching long in the late afternoon light. We didn't talk much at first, just the quiet rhythm of our shoes on the pavement, the rustle of her bag, the faint hum of distant traffic. Then, without looking at me, she said, "I saw you the other day. By your car. You looked upset." I blinked, caught off guard. I wasn't. Her lips curved, not quite a smile. "You were. You don't hide it as well as you think." I didn't know what to say to that, because she was right. And maybe that's why it slipped out, quiet, almost accidental. "I thought you had someone." That made her stop, not abruptly, but enough that I felt the air shift. She turned, eyebrows drawn together just slightly, like she wasn't sure she'd heard me right. "That man," I added quickly, regretting it even as the words left me. "In your driveway." Her eyes softened then, but there was something else there too, something sharp. "My brother," she said. Then, after a pause, "You thought, what exactly?" I swallowed, heat creeping up my neck. "Nothing. Just, I don't know." For a moment, she didn't answer. She just stood there, the grocery bag crinkling softly in her hands, her gaze steady on mine. Then, softer, "You think I have someone, and that bothers you." I wanted to deny it, laugh it off, pretend I hadn't said anything at all, but I didn't. "Yeah," I said instead. Quiet, honest. We walked again, slower now. The air felt different, heavier, but not in a bad way. Like we'd peeled back something neither of us could cover again. At the corner where our streets split, she stopped, set the grocery bag down on the low stone wall, and leaned against it, arms folded loosely over her chest. "You shouldn't," she said finally. "Shouldn't what?" "Care," she murmured. "Not like that. She broke off, shaking her head slightly. "I'm too old. Too everything." I stepped closer before I realized I was doing it. Close enough to see the way her lashes trembled when she blinked, the way her throat tightened as she swallowed. "I don't care," I said. Silence. Just her breathing and mine, and the faint rattle of a passing car somewhere behind us. Then she laughed, soft and uneven, like it had broken free without her permission. "You think you mean that," she said, "but you don't know what it would cost you." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that it wasn't about cost or sense or anything that could be weighed and measured. But I didn't, because in that moment, standing there with her hand resting on the wall just inches from mine, the only thing that mattered was how close we were. One step, one word, that's all it would take. She looked at me then, really looked, her eyes searching mine for something I couldn't name. And for a breathless second, I thought she'd found it. "Do you really want this?" she asked. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because I knew too well. For a few days, it felt different. She'd text sometimes, little things. A photo of the roses she'd finally trimmed back, a note about the neighbor's dog digging up her garden again. Once, just, storm tonight. Hope you're home before it starts. And I'd reply, always careful, always measured. Like if I used too many words, I'd ruin whatever fragile thread we were balancing on. But then, just as quietly, it stopped. No texts. No porch light left on. No chance meetings outside. I told myself she was busy, that it meant nothing. But then I saw her car gone for 2 nights straight, and on the third, a man's voice echoing faintly from inside her house when she pulled into the driveway. I froze in my own doorway, keys still in my hand, staring down the dark stretch of street between us. I didn't know what I felt. Not jealousy, not exactly. More like the ground had tilted without warning, leaving me scrambling for balance. The next morning, she waved when I walked out to the mailbox. Just a wave. A polite, distant gesture that felt like being dropped. Morning, she called. I nodded, forced something like a smile, and kept walking. By Thursday, the quiet had turned into something sharp. Every little sound in my apartment felt louder. The hum of the fridge, the click of the clock, my own uneven breathing. I tried to distract myself, stayed late at work, drove aimlessly, anything to avoid walking past her house and wondering. But Friday night, I cracked. I walked the length of the street twice, telling myself I was just stretching my legs, telling myself I wouldn't knock. I didn't. Her porch light was off, her curtains drawn, no sign of her car, and somehow, that felt worse than seeing her there with someone else. Saturday, a neighbor mentioned it casually, the way people do when they think it's harmless. She's got her daughter in town, the woman said, balancing a laundry basket on her hip. College break or something. You've probably seen her car. I hadn't. I didn't know she had a daughter. The weight of that hit harder than I expected. A life she'd never mentioned, whole pieces of her story she'd kept closed. And suddenly, everything shifted. Not the way I felt. That stayed the same, sharp and steady, but the way I fit into her world. Small. Temporary. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed with my phone in my hand, her name glowing at the top of the screen. I typed, "Are you okay?" Then deleted it. Typed, "I miss you." Deleted that, too. The cursor blinked against the empty field, waiting. But I didn't send anything. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. Sunday morning, I saw her across the street, carrying a grocery bag in one hand, keys in the other. She looked tired but put together, hair pulled back, sunglasses hiding her eyes. She glanced my way, hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second, like maybe she'd stop, maybe she'd say something, and then kept walking. I watched her disappear inside, the sound of the door clicking shut carrying farther than it should have. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't wait for the porch light to come on. It was late when I saw her again. Almost midnight, the street empty except for the hum of a single streetlight. I'd just gotten home from work, shoulders heavy, keys cold in my hand, when I noticed her porch light on. She was there, sitting on the steps, arms folded loosely, hair falling around her face like she hadn't bothered to fix it. I almost kept walking, almost let the moment pass. But something in the way her head lifted, just slightly, like she'd been waiting, made me stop. "You've been quiet," she said when I got closer. "So have you," I answered. My voice didn't sound like mine, rough, unsure. She exhaled, long and slow, like she'd been holding her breath for days. "I didn't mean to," she hesitated, eyes fixed somewhere over my shoulder. "I just needed some space." "My daughter, I know," I cut in gently. That got her attention. Her gaze snapped to mine, sharp for a second before softening. "You heard." I nodded. A neighbor mentioned it. The quiet stretched between us, thick but not hostile. "Just full." "I didn't tell you," she said finally. "About her. Or a lot of things." It felt easier to keep it separate. Cleaner. I swallowed, hands shoved deep in my pockets to keep from reaching out. "You don't owe me anything." "That's not true," she said, quiet but steady. "I think I do." "You've been." She trailed off, shaking her head slightly, like she couldn't find the word. "Here." And I didn't know what to do with that. My throat tightened. "You don't have to do anything with it," I said. I didn't expect. Yes, you did. The way she said it wasn't cruel, just honest. And so did I. The air felt heavy then, the way it does before rain. She looked at me, really looked, and something in her expression broke. Soft, raw, the kind of thing you can't take back once it's seen. I'm scared, she admitted. The words barely carried past the space between us. Not of you. Just of what happens if I let this be real. I let out a laugh, quiet and sharp all at once. Yeah, I said. Me too. Her lips curved. Not a smile exactly, but something close. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, she shifted, her hand resting lightly on the step beside her. An invitation without words. I sat, close enough that our shoulders brushed, not enough to make it more than it was. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. Just there. After a while, she said, I don't know where this goes. Me neither, I admitted. And somehow, that felt like enough. She turned her head then, just slightly, eyes catching mine in the soft glow of the porch light. Okay, she asked. It was such a simple word. But in her voice, it carried everything. The fear, the hope, the small, fragile thread of something neither of us could name yet. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. And for the first time in weeks, the quiet between us felt like it was finally saying something. Be why the time summer rolled into fall, the quiet between us had changed. Not gone, just different. Softer. Easier to live in. Some nights, she'd knock on my door just after 8, still in her work clothes, hair pinned back. We wouldn't talk much, just tea for her, black coffee for me, the hum of the fridge filling the space between us. Other nights, I'd find myself on her porch, helping her fix the loose step or bringing her the mail she'd forgotten to grab. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden confessions or wild declarations. Just small things, steady and certain. One morning in October, I woke up to find her sitting on my front steps, 2 steaming mugs balanced carefully in her hands. Tea, she said simply, handing one to me when I opened the door. I glanced at the clock, 8:47 a.m., and smiled before I even realized I was doing it. Thought you hated mornings, I said. I do, she admitted, settling onto the step beside me. But you like your coffee hot, and you never make it before 9. I took a sip, bitter, perfect, and didn't say anything. She didn't, either. And that quiet, shared space felt like something we'd both been building toward without even realizing it. There were still days when she'd pull back a little, when old doubts or old habits made her retreat into herself. I'd feel it, that subtle shift, like a door closing just enough to notice. And there were nights when I'd catch myself wondering what this was, what we were, and whether either of us would ever say it out loud. But then she'd reach across the table during one of those long silences and brush her fingers against mine. A simple touch, steady and sure, and I'd know. We didn't need the words. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Her daughter came by for Thanksgiving. I met her briefly, in passing, just a quiet hello in the driveway. She was polite, kind-eyed like her mother. Later, Lena told me she'd asked about me, and for the first time, she'd said my name without flinching. He's important, she'd told her. Important. That word sat in my chest for days. Not heavy, just solid, like something I could finally hold. By winter, our routines had shifted without us even talking about it. Friday nights, I'd pick up takeout, and she'd have the porch light on, waiting. Sunday mornings, she'd water her plants while I sat on her steps, sipping coffee and reading headlines off my phone, pretending not to notice the way her robe slipped down her shoulder. There was nothing perfect about it. Sometimes she'd get quiet in ways that scared me. Sometimes I'd second-guess every glance, every word. But we stayed. And that staying, that quiet, everyday choice, felt more like love than anything I'd ever known. One night in January, the power went out. The whole street, swallowed by a heavy black stillness. I found her by instinct, flashlight in hand, knocking softly even though I knew she was awake. When she opened the door, candlelight flickered behind her, warm and soft. Coffee won't work, I said, holding up the useless kettle. Tea, either, she smiled. We sat by the window with nothing but a single candle between us, the world outside still and quiet. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for a long time, Neither of us spoke. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "This feels like the storms I used to love." I didn't answer, just shifted enough for her to rest a little closer. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for her to pull away, not for the other shoe to drop. This was it. Quiet. Ordinary. Hours. Months later, on a morning that smelled faintly of rain and coffee, she caught my hand on her porch, her thumb tracing the scar on my knuckle from that broken mug months ago. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. But we both smiled. That small, quiet smile that only we understood. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?